And now, a word from
Infirmary Media.
Hey dudes and dudettes, thanks for tuning into this episode of the Be Kind and Rewind podcast, a podcast chock full of everything nostalgic about the 80s, 90s, and more, with nostalgic movie commentaries and celebrity interviews. I'm your host, Carlos, and this episode, we're popping out our antennas and killing time with a rousing game of Snake as we get into the evolution of cell phones from flip phones to smartphones, and how this technology shifted our lives for the better or worse, and along with some listener shoutouts as well. So, starting off the new year with this episode, I can't wait. I've been thinking about this one for a while, and I just can't believe we haven't gotten into cell phones yet. So it's one of those things. We are moving into the 2019, so we're in that 20-year era of nostalgia. So like years like 1999, 2000, and 2000 and up are going to start popping up in these episodes. So, be warned. We are now getting into the early 2000s when it comes to nostalgia for the Be Kind and Rewind podcast. So like I said, wanted to get into cell phones because this is obviously something we all have in our hands currently, or will have eventually in a few seconds, and something that, most of us who are 80s and 90s kids, we pretty much have been dealing with this for most of our lives. We've been that lucky generation that's been witness to some of the most technological advances in human history, with the cell phones as no exception. We've grown up with cell phone technology, continuously updating with new features to make our lives easier, from the constant clicks to the swipe and tap that we are enjoying today. So really what I want to do is just kind of, this is a little bit of an educational episode as well.
Reading is fundamental. Now let's get on with this school thing. You teach.
I also want to give you a brief history on some cell phone, how the cell phone came to be, before we go through some of the more iconic cell phones that I think made their mark in pop culture. So I'm probably gonna miss a couple. I'm probably gonna miss some of your favorite cell phones that you grew up having. So I apologize in advance. But these are some of the ones that I feel like not only did I experience, but I think most of the people would relate once they get to hear about some of these features and maybe some of these ringtones and some of these other cool stuff, find out about some of these cell phones that we grew up with. So just like I said, a little history on cell phones. So I guess many of the early cell phones in the 1900s were considered to be car phones because they were too large and cumbersome to be carried around in a pocket or purse. So from its start in St. Louis, Missouri, back in 1946, AT&T introduced mobile telephone services to 100 towns and highway corridors within 2 years, by 1948. So calls were set up manually by an operator, and the user had to depress a button on the headset and on a handset to talk, and release the button to listen. So basically like a walkie-talkie, essentially.
And did I catch a niner in there? Were you calling from a walkie-talkie?
No, it was cordless.
But the call subscriber equipment weighed about 80 pounds. So if you think that your 7-inch iPhone is weighing you down, think of this 80 pounds. Some people were either had a lug around their car, or literally probably had a backpack that they rode around, they had on throughout the day. So that was the beginning phases of the cell phone. The first handheld mobile phone was demonstrated by Motorola senior engineer John F. Mitchell and Martin Cooper. Actually, Martin Cooper is the senior engineer, back in 1973, using a handset, and that weighed about 4.5 pounds. So that was it's definitely a decrease in poundage.
That's what she said.
But still enough that you could do some curls, and you might actually get some tone and shift and shape to it. But what he did for the first call, Martin Cooper, he called a rival telecommunications company, informed them that he was speaking from via a mobile phone.
I wanted to really put a dazzling demonstration on for this journalist. I took a chance and called Joel Engel. Dr. Engel was running the AT&T program, And I said, "Hi, Joel, it's Marty Cooper." "Hi, Marty," he says. "I'm calling you from a cell phone, but a real cell phone, a personal, handheld, portable cell phone." There was silence at the other end of the line. To this day, Joel doesn't remember that call, and I'm not sure I blame him.
Basically just rubbing in the noses in it, which is, it's the ultimate flex, I guess, at this point, is what the kids are saying these days. But AT&T continued to lead the way in the mobile phone market. So it wasn't until like 1982 the company got permission from the FCC to use the radio spectrum for commercial phone use. So from there, they and others created their own networks, and cell phones became one of the fastest growing products. So starting out, of course, like with anything, it's a slow build. Not too many networks around, the antennas or all that good stuff wasn't as prominent as they are today. So even in huge cities like New York City, only had a few networks and channels. And to think, like I said, New York City, they only allowed about 12 to 15 people could be on these channels at a given time in the entire city. So I know that cell phones were much more rare back in the day as well, but even if you had maybe a couple hundred people in a huge city like New York City, that's still not a very good connection rate. So you had a lot of people driving around trying to get that connection. But basically, since 1983 till 2014, so you can see this info is a little dated, the worldwide mobile subscriptions grew to over 7 billion. I'm sure even more since then, and climbing to this day, because it has gone to the point where it used to be everyone and your mom had a cell phone, to be everyone and their kids babies have a cell phone. So that's why we're going to get into this history, because it has gone from this rarity of a thing to now it's such a common thing that some people have 2, 3 in their homes. Who knows? So like I said, we're going to get into some of the more prominent ones that I think had held their mark on pop culture. So the first one is more of a genre. This is the car phones from back in the day.
Those who think getting a car phone is not for them, whatever the reason, haven't kept up with the booming industry of cellular radio telephones. Scenes like this are becoming commonplace in U.S. cities where cellular is available today. This revolution in communications could make it possible for more and more people to have a phone in their car.
So the first real cell phone was more or less a car phone. Back in 1910, engineer from Stockholm, Sweden, named Lars Magnus Ericsson, that name might ring a bell. He installed a phone in his car, and he drove around the country. So Ericsson would connect his phone with a pair of long electrical wires into telephone poles installed along the road. So this was the first car phone. It really didn't take off because, of course, you kind of have to know what you're doing, and not too many people, I think if you don't know what you're doing, back in the day, I'm sure many people tried and probably didn't live to tell the story in that regard. But the new technology stunned the American public when it appeared in the 1954 Humphrey Bogart movie Sabrina.
What? I called you. Say, who is this? Sergeant Riley? Well, there isn't any Sergeant Riley here. Wait a minute, you better talk to my mother.
So that's when people were, I guess, introduced to the concept that you could call somebody from your car. If Humphrey can do it, maybe I could do it. So 1984, analog cellular service began to spring up all over the country, which began the boom for people to get personal cell phones. So customers would be spending hundreds of dollars for mechanics to install these, install the wiring and for the car phones, and cutting holes essentially into your car for the antenna and running the wires through, just so you get that efficient 80s cell signal. I definitely had friends and family who would do this. My family, we had a car phone. It mainly was like that emergency line, like if you get stranded while traveling, or I don't know, the occasional, if someone will happen to be on their way to Walmart, you could call them and tell them, hey, don't forget to grab some milk. But other than that, I mean, they were mainly for businessmen who needed to work outside of work. Once they're on their way to home while they're sitting in traffic, they can still get some things done. So that was mainly the use for car phones. Again, early technology. So for these plans, early cell phone plans for car phones weren't cheap. I mean, you're paying for every dial, every call. I mean, you weren't texting, but you were calling every received call. So it was definitely, you're counting your pennies in regards to when and why you're using these car phones. But it definitely was a status symbol for sure. If you had a car phone, if somebody knew you had that saw that antenna on there, it was like kind of a distinct antenna. Like they knew that you were rocking a car phone. To the point where people would just buy faux antennas and throw them on their car, so people would think that they had that. That's not the first impersonation when it comes to status symbols when it comes to cell phones that we'll talk about. But yeah, like I said, car phones definitely were. I feel like for some reason those were making a bigger splash at first more than the standard cell phones, just because of course they were even more mobile because you were in your car and you can call pretty much anywhere while you're moving. So that was essentially the ideal situation. But like I said, my family, we just kind of rocked it out in a rarity. It sat in this leather case in the trunk for years and years. I think we turned it on once after the fact, and it still turned on. No idea if it still works, but if you still have one out there, I mean, there's still a chance that you can hook it up to AT&T, start making yourself some calls if you want to get rid of that heavy smartphone plan. So that was the first genre, some car phones. I think, like I said, they made a huge mark. So we're going to get into the brick phone genre. So the first brick phone, of course, the famous Dynatec 8000X. This was the series of cell phones manufactured by Motorola from 1983 to 1994. And it stood for the Dynamic Adaptive Total Area Coverage. So it was the truly first mobile cell phone which can connect to a telephone network without assistance of a mobile operator and could be carried by the user. So car phones, you still had the wiring, you still had to be attached to something in some regard, whereas this one you could walk freely anywhere you wanted to call somebody. And like I said, if it sounds familiar, it's because you saw Gordon Gekko and Zach Morris flopping these things around back in the 80s.
And you can use your cellular phone to order me a pizza.
Yes, hello. I'd like to order a large pizza with mushrooms, anchovies, and the hottest peppers you can find.
And so the thing weighed 28 ounces, basically almost 2 pounds. It was 10 inches, and that didn't include the rubber duck whip antenna, which we all remember that. And due to the resemblance in the size to standard clay-fired brick, was nicknamed the brick phone by users. Later term applied to other brands that we'll get into. A fully charged battery was 10 hours and offered 30 minutes of talk time. Also offered LED display for dialing or recall of one of 30 numbers. So this is like, it sounds pretty standard, but this is, you gotta think, this is 1983. This is huge. Like, you go from making calls from your long ass telephone cord in your mom's kitchen to calling people from wherever you are, essentially. So this is big stuff back in the day. It was priced, listen to this, at $3,995, so just under $4,000 back in 1984.
Good Lord, that's a lot of them. That costs more than my house.
It would equivalent to about $9,000 in 2017, so they kind of did the inflation. So would you pay $9,000 for a cell phone? I mean, literally people are paying over $1,000 for the new iPhones and stuff like that, but I don't know. I'm sure there are definitely people out there who will do it, so I'm not second guessing that at all. But the phone showed up in many movies, like we talked about in TV shows, basically associating with the privileged who love to use their phones in public to flaunt their economic status. Another status symbol, of course. People knew what the price tag was on these phones, so they saw you walking around with this thing on. Oh yeah, they knew you were doing well for yourself. And again, with the car phone, people were doing the antenna, the fake antenna on their cars to make people think they had, a car phone. This cell phone, the Dynatec, same thing. People were buying these, fake brick, just plastic ones that had no workings inside, but they would drive around and they'd be talking on them, looking like they're talking on them, probably driving in like some old Honda Civic, but they had this $4,000 phone that they're talking on. So yeah, it definitely, again, another status symbol. Cell phones from day one, I guess, have always been somewhat of a status symbol. So there's always going to be those posers, as they say. So in 1983, like I said, it was one of the first available handheld ones. We saw it with Gordon Gekko in Wall Street, and then of course Zach Morris from Saved by the Bell, ordering pizzas and scheming from class with his huge brick cell phone that basically those two things are so synonymous with each other, Zach Morris and the brick phone, or the brick phone and Zach Morris. You can't get away from it. So it's gotten to that kind of iconic status. So the Dynatec 8000X, one of the first brick phones out there. I never personally owned one. My family did. Of course, $4,000. No way in hell that we were dropping that kind of cash for a phone like that, even though we were getting car phones. But I think it was a little bit of different price range for sure by that time. But I definitely remember having I think they had like candy, those candy brick phones that it had candy inside of it, but you could keep the phone. It kind of looked like the size of a regular one. And they also sold toy ones, which I'm pretty sure are the same ones that full-grown adults were buying to ride around their cars to make their friends think that they were, dropping 4 Gs on a phone.
I'm not your friend, buddy. I'm not your buddy, girl. He's not your guy, friend. I'm not your friend, buddy. We're not your buddies, girl. I'm not your guy, friend.
So yeah, not something we were looking to spend cash on, but I was definitely enamored with it, thanks to Saved by the Bell. So thanks, Zach Morris.
Enough. Zach, hang up that phone now.
So the next brick phone in our evolution right now, we're heading over to Nokia. The 6610. This is my first cell phone, my first one that was officially like mine. This one came out in December 18th, 1997, and released in a little earlier, 1998. Of course, like I said, my first cell phone, I was prime middle school at this point in time. Cell phones were still a new thing. It was a thing that gave parents a new way to keep tabs on kids. It was pretty much considered uncool for a while for everyone, if everyone knew that you had a cell phone, because that basically meant that they knew your parents bought you a cell phone because they wanted to keep tabs on you. So it wasn't until a few years later that the stigma wore off on my school. So you kind of had to keep your cell phone on the DL for a little while, because if they saw, they're like, oh, well, are you texting your mom? Are you calling your mom calling you? You gotta check your mom's voicemail. So it was a lot of that. So yeah, you had to keep your Nokia 6110 on the DL, but it did have 3 games on it. It had Memory, Logic, and it introduced the classic arcade game Snake. So for those of you who want a challenge, I'm down any day. I could play Snake all day. It's like Tetris. It's just so addicting. Like, I had my Game Boy. I could have played that. What was I doing? I was playing Snake most of the time. In class, I was playing it on car trips, on the bus when we're going to our sports games, stuff like that. Like anything, I was playing Snake. It was definitely an addicting one, but I'm glad that I haven't downloaded it recently, because it could be my downfall if I did. But the phone also had one of the first times the features was a calculator, clock, and calendar. So this course, like I said, was the best way to play games in class without lugging my Game Boy around. But also, these are things that I didn't use at all, but I should have, given my history with math. But of course, again, still early in the cell phone era, so there are all kinds of fees and fees and taxes applied when it comes to calling and texting. This is the era where, for whatever reason, you could call after 7 p.m. for free. I don't know why, but you could. And so this is basically how my girlfriend in high school and I would communicate. We'd leave each other at 2-3 o'clock in the afternoon and be like, all right, well, I'll talk to you at 7:01 tonight. and we'll just talk about everything that we did today, recap it, and then see who wants to get off the phone first and see how long that lasts. That was pretty much the epitome of all my calls at that point. But that, again, was the first cell phone. But the other brick phone, this next generation of the Nokia, was the 3310. So this one was this was the official brick. This was my go-to. I love this phone. This one was back in September 2000. It was released. It was one of the most successful phones from Nokia. Sold over 126 million units. So that's a lot. The phone is still widely acclaimed and gained a cult status due to its durability. Of course, being the brick, you could basically drop this thing on. I would drop it off a lifeguard stand onto the smoldering hot concrete down below in a small puddle. I'd pick it up. It wouldn't even drop the call, let alone get a scratch. Nowadays, you do that with your iPhone would literally just explode into 1,000 pieces. But again, another phone that had many features on it. The 3310 is known for having the features including the calculator, of course, the Nokia network monitor, stopwatch, and a reminder function. Again, more features that I did not use at all when I probably should have for, of course, being late to class a lot. Could have used some of these reminders or a stopwatch. I did run track, or I was in some sort of athletic shape at that point, so maybe a stopwatch on my phone could have been useful, things like that, it kept on with continue with more games onto the cell phone. It had 4 games on this one. They had Pairs 2, Space Impact, and Batumi, and of course the hugely popular Snake 2, the sequel. They brought it back. This was, of course, an upgraded version. The screen was a little bit better. I mean, it wasn't that much better. They had a better light bulb that lit it up better, basically. And there was another one that I would just spend hours sitting in my bed doing nothing but playing Snake on my phone. This is the early tablet cell phones when your kids are like, what you were looking at the kids just staring at this phone. Like, that's what I was doing when it came to Snake. So the Nokia 3310 definitely rocked out the newer version of that. And also, this is one of the first cell phones that you could start customizing. Before we could do minimal things. I think the other Nokia, you could put like some face plates on it, but this one, you could cover the whole cell phone. You could get full-on cases and cover your cell phone in basically any design you could ever think of. Go online, you find anything. You like Lord of the Rings? Get a Lord of the Rings one. Are you a furry? Get a furry one. Like, things like that. You could just get off the wall type of covers for this cell phone, which was one of the cool things about it, because at that point, you could either pick through like 3 colors and you have the same color everybody else has. So if you can customize it, oh man, that was the go-to at the time. And also, one of the other things too, it also had 35 ringtones, which was huge because the last one only had like a handful of them. So it was, of course, all built in. They can be downloaded or composed by the user on a handset. I never even took the time or effort to even try that, but I'm sure there are people out there who did it. And if you're one of them, send me some of those. I gotta hear, because I still remember my favorite ringtone was Bandineri. That one, it was my alarm. It was my phone for everybody. I could have changed phone. You could attach phone ringtones for each person, but I just kept it at the same one for everybody. So every time I hear that in the distance, it sends me right back to the early 2000s. Let's see, the phone, of course, had various profiles that can be set, number of preferences, such as silent mode, which was huge because you can't even do that anymore. The iPhone won't even let you barely, if you go to vibrate, it's still, the vibrating is almost as loud or louder than a regular phone ring. So I wish they hadn't taken out the silent feature on the iPhone, but that was one of the cooler things about this one. You could miss some calls, go back to it and say, I missed 9 calls from my girlfriend. I wonder what she wanted, but you had no idea that you missed them. See, you could always play that. I had no idea, baby. I was on silent. Didn't even see the phone. Or nowadays, you can't even get away with it. You're like, your phone vibrates. I know it. So you can't get away with it as easily nowadays. So the Nokia, they were ahead of the game. And then one of the last things too about this phone, it was so awesome that they decided to bring it back. So the iconic 3310 design was launched in 2017. The new Nokia 3310 model comes with a comprehensive update over its predecessor with a 2.4-inch touchscreen color display, rear camera, and a micro SD slot running between $60 to $75 online. So if you're tired of spending over $1,000 for that iPhone, go back in time and get yourself the original brick, the 3310, for literally 10% of the price. Do it. So, like I said, this was my phone for a couple years. I had it probably until like at least 2003 or 4. I rocked this phone out. So now we're going to move on to the next generation. We're moving on to the flip phone.
Now, through this special TV offer, you can receive a Motorola flip phone with Cellular One service for just pennies a day. Now, everyone can enjoy the freedom of a personal cellular phone. You can make a call anywhere or get a call anytime.
Hi.
Stuck in traffic? Call and change that meeting before you're late.
Yeah, Dan, let's change the meeting to 10.
So the first flip phone was created by Motorola back in 1989. It was called the StarTAC. It was inspired by the communicator from Star Trek. So this bad boy, it was the world's first clamshell handset where the mouthpiece folded over the keyboard, although on later productions, the mouthpiece was actually located on the base of the phone, but, you know, tomatoes. But basically, this set a standard and became the model for modern flip phones today, as there are hundreds of models and brands that have utilized this model for their phones since then. But the phone became another status symbol in the late 80s and early 90s, to the point it was simply just the standard by the early 2000s. I talked about earlier, it was a rarity for people to have cell phones in the mid to late 90s, but now in the mid 2000s, just a few years later, it was not the case. It was the opposite. Everybody had a cell phone. They were becoming cheaper and becoming more accessible. It was pretty surreal because, like I said, cell phones in high school, almost unheard of. Just some people had them for emergency use only, and mainly business people. And then once you get to college, everybody had one. You're exchanging numbers, not home numbers, cell phone numbers. That was kind of a big switch right there. So you weren't asking for someone's cell or home number. You had to worry about calling a girl and having to get screened by her mom and dad. You call them directly.
Who the fuck has the goddamn gall to call his house on a Tuesday night? God damn it!
You're gonna miss it!
Oh, please, tell me something I don't know. I wait all week for the fucking equalizer, and they have to fucking... Hello?
That was definitely huge back in the day. Also, the flip phones began to incorporate updating technology with the use of the camera. You could send video or picture messages, basically opening Pandora's box for more possibilities to come. So it's the first time you could save your family's and friends' pictures as their contacts or faces for caller ID, so you can screen your calls just like at home. Other trends too with the flip phone. This is where, this is the mid 2000s, like the epitome of the mid 2000s, is all those commercials where you could download ringtones that were not featured on the phone. You could download your favorite songs as ringtones, but customizable if you wanted to as well. It was basically the MySpace for phones, where you can personalize almost every aspect. It was getting kind of out of control at some point in the early to the mid 2000s. Every commercial break from like the Chappelle Show was some third-party brand like Jamster, with enough cash to shell out some of these top commercials, over-the-top commercials, for all these ringtones from rock to hip-hop. Just text some number and get your ringtone sent back to you for like $5.
Right here, Stained. Get it now as part of the Hyper Plan. Text Write 4 and send to 75555. Jamster.
Back off, I'll take you on. Headstrong to take on anyone.
Get this hot single from Trapped as part of the Hyper Plan. Headstrong. Text Head 4 now and send to 75555. Jamster.
I will admit, I was a sucker for a few of them. I did get a couple of ringtones back in the day, but then I got off the sucker game and I started making my own and going through a whole very tedious process of doing that and getting them onto my phone and then making sure it was the right format and then adding that to whoever I thought felt worthy of that phone ringtone that I created, and it was all for nothing because I was the only one listening to it. I would maybe get a few phone calls in public, and people would be like, "Yeah, that sounds interesting. Were you going to answer that?" No, so it wasn't as cool as people would think, because you just hear someone's cell phone ring, you'd be like, "Okay, I know that's the type of music you like, and now I can judge you off of that. But now you should answer that phone. Do it now, or I'm going to kill you." That was normally the interactions when it came to these ringtones back in the day, because people were all about letting you hear their ringtones. So like, listen to what I got. No, I don't. Answer your phone. So yeah. So that was one of the big things when it came to flip phones back in the day. I just remember those commercials, man. Back in college, that was like, oh man, we get like 2 or 3 of those commercials per break. It was crazy, and they all seemed to look exactly the same. For whatever reason, it seemed like they hired the same guy to make all of these commercials. So they put no effort into it, just enough to make it look a little pretty and make it basic enough so like the lowest common denominator can understand what they're trying to sell them. So yeah, so that was the flip phones. So now we're moving on to our most recent generation of cell phones, was the smartphones.
Can you hear me now? Good.
So really the first official smartphone was the BlackBerry back in the day. It was the BlackBerry 850, they called it. Was announced back in July 12th in 1999. The name was chosen due to the resemblance of the keyboard buttons to the fact that the driplets that compose the BlackBerry fruit. So that's the reason, if you've ever wanted to know. The device itself, had 6 or 8 line display and was capable of sending messages, emails, and had calendars, address books, task lists, a calculator, and an alarm function. So it was one of the first wireless devices capable of connecting people to their corporate email and contacts. So this was pretty much the first game changer when it came to cell phones back in the day. BlackBerry, was definitely, on top for the longest time, because they were the first ones in 1999. This is, essentially 7-8 years before we get the first iPhone. So they had a good run. BlackBerry took over the market. Of course, they had all these features that enabled business people and people in the business industry who already were using cell phones.
The ethics of business can be summarized in, the thing about ethics.
Just gave them more features and more freedom to use their cell phones for more use and to help keep their lives intact. So of course it blew up, and it was in the first 3 months following the announcement, the stock went up 50% from $22 to $33 as the wireless company focused on creating keep more features for their phones, to the point where former President of the United States Barack Obama became known for his dependence on a BlackBerry device for communicating during the 2008 presidential campaign. Despite the security issues, he insisted on using it even after the inauguration. So this is seen by some as akin to a celebrity endorsement, which marketing experts have estimated were to be $25 million to $50 million, just because former President Barack Obama used it. So I guess he still uses it to this day. I'm not sure, man. But now Obama has gone straight dad mode if he's still using the BlackBerry, because it's time to upgrade. I mean, my dad he's still on the flip phone era still. It'll probably be a couple of years if he ever uses an iPhone. But Obama, you gotta get on the iPhone. But like I said, they were around from 99 to about 2007, where they basically fell off the map because they just didn't adapt to what we're about to talk about in regards to cell phone technology. And so they sort of kind of fell to the wayside in regards to, their stock and their place in the market, with other companies coming to rise, and new technology as well. So the BlackBerry, being as awesome as it was, and a game changer from the beginning with all these new features and internet access and emails and things like that, it just failed to adapt to the way the technology changed. It created the change, but it also failed to adapt to the new change as well that came about. And that leads us to, our last generation of smartphones, which is the iPhones and the Androids. of course, we all know about, the iPhone, beginning back in the day with Steve Jobs. He was the one who really kind of wanted to get this type of technology into the market for consumers. He wanted Apple to start focusing on the touchscreen devices and tablet computers as opposed to next generation of some other device that they had been using. So it was one of those. They were very hesitant. They didn't know if it was something that was going to work because Steve Jobs had already been in and out of Apple for, going through R&D, a lot of R&D for failed products that never made it to market. But it wasn't until January 2007 that Steve Jobs announced that the iPhone at the Macworld convention, receiving a substantial media attention. He announced that the first iPhone would be released later that year, June 29th of 2007. So when they did release it, it was same time BlackBerry was still out, and so they had similar features in regards to some of the hardware and software, but Apple just blew them out of the water when they announced the App Store, things like that, like thousands of apps. We would call them applications back in the day because we didn't know that we could call them apps. We hadn't come out with the lingo yet. And so we could get into this little online store on our phones and download apps for anything and everything we could ever basically dream. If we all of our little niche interests, we could download an app for. And on top of that, the phone had Wi-Fi and Bluetooth capabilities. It had, the first generation had 2 megapixel camera on the I think it was just on the back side before they added the selfie one on the front. It also, the battery had 250 hours of use, up to 8 hours of talk time and music play, with of course second generation, the GPS and the Google Maps being added, and that was huge on itself. I remember when this got released, and I was like, I couldn't really believe that we were going to be able to enjoy this technology. Like, we're us plebes get to enjoy this elite technology. This is going to be huge, and and it was so expensive at first. Of course, it took me a couple years to come around. It was the first initial, I can't afford it. Damn it, that sucks. To damn it, I can't afford it. I hate Apple. I'm not going to get it. I'm never going to get an iPhone. To where, I got a few extra bucks in my pocket. I bet I could get an iPhone. And to now, I still have an iPhone. So it was kind of that love-hate relationship. But from the day one, just hearing these features that day, because we'd been basically living in caveman times when it came to cell phones, comparing that, with the flip phones and with the, the bricks and things like that, or the car phones. It was like, man, this is everything put together and more. Just it was crazy. It still is surreal to think about that technology that we have in our hands. We literally have a tiny computer in our hands, a computer that, back in the 90s, we wouldn't even imagine that this is technology that you see in like sci-fi movies, not something that we get to enjoy in real life. So it's still something to me that it's crazy. But I do have to like kind of, we have to challenge ourselves to not be so consumed by them, though. It's one thing, with, the features that we get, all the cool stuff we could do on them and do with them, it does create great opportunities for people, but also it sends people into a tailspin. So yeah, cell phones definitely a double-edged sword with the advancement with technology, especially with iPhones and Androids. We're getting conveniences we never would have thought of, but we're also, with those conveniences, we're gonna have there's gonna be some backlash, I think. Symptoms that we're not aware of, and so we just kind of be mindful of that, I think. But it's still, like I said, this generation, my generation, 80s and 90s kids growing up and just seeing all this technology just develop. And this isn't the only technology I'll get into in regards to what we've been able to witness in our lives growing up. There's plenty of other things that we're going to get into this year and other episodes. Cell phone is just one of them, one of many technologies that we were very lucky to grow up just witnessing the evolution and getting to enjoy it to the fullest. And who knows, we got plenty of years left, and who knows what's in store in regards to cell phone technology. So that was the last generation of the history of the generations in regards to the cell phones. So there's a few honorable mentions. I know some of you out there are like, he didn't say this, he didn't say that one, he didn't talk about that. I knew it. I wasn't going to get to everything, but there are some honorable mentions. The first one was the T-Mobile Sidekick. You know, I know there's another phone I never had, but I really wanted. And I just remember seeing only the cool kids had the Sidekick, and they could do all. You know, this is like get on the internet. They had the keyboard that flipped out. Just all about that flipping out screen. And so the T-Mobile Sidekick was one that I didn't get on board with, even though I really wanted. But I just didn't feel like I was cool enough, because I seriously thought every cool kid I knew had one. When I was like, I got it. Maybe they know something I don't. And so so the T-Mobile Sidekick is a nice honorable mention. Other ones, we have tiny phones. So cell phones at some point, for whatever reason, got really tiny. We got it was kind of the same time with the flip phones into the iPhone era, where the flip phones were turning into non-flip phones, just straight up, just handheld phones, but they were getting tinier and tinier to the point. I remember one of my friends, he literally, like, if you looked at it now, it'd just be like a long USB drive is what the phone looked like, with an antenna. You just pulled out this tiny antenna, and I saw him turn on. I'm like, how do you even function with this? How does this not break in your pocket? It reminded me of that SNL skit when Will Ferrell pulled out his tiny little phone, or Zoolander when he pulls out his tiny cell phone. It's literally, they were making fun of that time in cell phone era where cell phones were so tiny. People were basically, you probably just lose them in your pocket. You couldn't even find your cell phone in your pocket. They were so tiny. So, like I said, it was short-lived though, thankfully. I think it was maybe like a year or two that kind of happened before I think iPhone came out, and just kind of that just fell to the wayside, and everybody was on the iPhone train, smartphone train at that point. So yeah, tiny phones. I don't know, really, we didn't need them to be that tiny. Smaller is great. We like small things, but they got too tiny. they got doll size tiny, basically. And so the last honorable mention is burner phones. Basically the same thing as the flip phones or the handheld phones I talked about. Burner phones, for your common drug dealer, or if you happen to keep losing your phone all the time, you can just go buy these burner phones that you just turn on for whatever you needed it for, and basically they're untraceable still to this day. So I'm not trying to give out any tips or anything, but I think that's still how it goes nowadays. But burner phones, yeah, man, burner phones were huge in the drug industry. We'll just say that. And so yeah, those and of course friends who would constantly lose phones, they would just eventually come down to the realization they just need to use burner phones, because they were only like $20 to $30 at the most, and if you kept losing your like $300 $400 phone, what's the point? Just get these. So yeah, burner phones, man, those were underrated, probably still utilized to this day. So those are the honorable mentions. But the last thing before we end the episode today, we got some Twitter shout outs with our Twitter poll. The Twitter poll was, what was your favorite cell phone and why? So I had 4 choices. We had the Nokia 3310, the Motorola flip phone, the T-Mobile Sidekick, and the Motorola Razr. And the winner is the Motorola Razr. Yes, this was released back in 2004. I definitely had my own Motorola Razr because of that striking thin appearance of it. It was initially marketed as an exclusive fashion phone, but after they lowered the price, because I remember when I first saw it, it was seriously like $300 or $400, and I was like, I can't do it. But they they cut that price in half within the next year or two, and basically anybody and everybody can get it. And so I got my hands on it, mainly because I saw it in a number of different shows and movies. Like they had it in Lost, A Good Year, Burn Notice, Top Gear, Oprah, and my personal favorite at the time, Entourage, because E was definitely rocking a Razr back in the day. So yeah, Razr was everyone's favorite cell phone, and definitely mine. One of my favorite ones, because it had the caller ID outside of the phone, so you didn't have to you didn't have to flip your phone up to see who was calling you. You could just be like, I ain't got time for that person. So yeah, the Razr, definitely solid phone. But we have some Twitter shout outs here First one we have is Jess at Skater_Girl11. She says, I didn't have any of these, but wanted the Motorola Razr so bad. Well, Jess, I think you can fulfill your dreams nowadays. I think you can definitely rock out the Motorola. You can find one for probably like $20 or $30. Just do it. Jump off the smartphone bandwagon and go back to the flip phone. I think it's time. So go ahead and do that. Next one, we got Super Mario Bros. At Super Movie Pod. They said Nokia brick because I gotta play Snake. Like I said, Snake was the go-to. It probably still is. It should be a standard on every cell phone ever. And then they should also have a running Hall of Fame of high scores, so everyone knows what score they need to be and how much time they should waste doing that. So yes, the next one we got the Streamer's Guide at Streamer Guide. The Sidekick because I left it in my pocket too long. It always seemed to open, unlock, and randomly buy me a surprise game from the fledgling internet browser it had. Yes, of course we talked about the Sidekick, and it is one I do regret not having, but they did just release a new one this last year, so I did respond to them telling them that. So maybe Streamer's Guy is gonna grab themselves a updated Sidekick. One that's not going to be buying, random things on apps and stuff like that in their pocket. So we'll see. The tension builds. And the last one we have is New10 at I_am_numero_uno. And they say, I believe mine was the Motorola's T720 silver flip phone like this one. Is it 2003 or 2004? It looks like probably 2003, maybe even earlier because it looks so familiar. I'm pretty sure that's the same Sprint phone that I had back in the day. I remember this. This was this is when I thought I could do cell phones on my own. So I was like, Mom and Dad, I'm gonna get my own cell phone. I'm gonna get my own plan. I'm not gonna just give you money for it. So I'm gonna get this Sprint phone. So yeah, they let me do it. They weren't worried about not getting an extra $100 on their bill. So I wouldn't get this phone. And with the first month I get the bill, I got like a $250 bill because I guess my after 7 p.m. was supposed to be is actually after 9 p.m., which I didn't get for Sprint. So for weeks and weeks, from 7 to 9 o'clock, I would just be on my cell phone with my girlfriend for hours on end, and it added up. So yeah, that was my first cell phone mistake when it comes to thinking that you knew better than your parents. so that was all the Twitter shout outs. So thanks everyone for that. And really that was the episode in regards to the evolution of cell phones from flip phones to smartphones. I hope you guys learned a few things about the phones that you may have had growing up, or maybe phones that you may want to go back to here before too long. I mean, eBay, Amazon, you're gonna find them one way or another, so maybe you should and see what it's like. Let's all do it. It's 2019. Let's jump off the smartphone bandwagon and let's go back to the old schools. Let's go back to the Sidekick. Let's go back to the brick. Let's go back to car phones. I want to see people getting antennas on their cars. So let's do it. I'm all for it. If you do it, send me a picture. I gotta see it. But other than that, everybody, I really appreciate you tuning into this episode of the Be Kind and Rewind podcast. Make sure you tune in every Throwback Thursdays for new episodes of the podcast. Subscribe and rate us on all podcast apps, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, YouTube, and Infirmary Media Podcast Network. Also, follow the podcast on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Be Kind Rewind Pod for all of your nostalgic needs. So thanks, and be excellent to each other.
You're listening to
Infirmary Media.
Did you hear that? Infirmary Media.
Infirmary.
Is anybody there?
Docking complete.